My name is Margaret, and I can tell you with certainty that I remember the exact moment my life shifted, like the floor under me tilted just enough to throw every step off balance. It began with a phone call, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even answer. It was a Thursday morning, too bright for October, when the air outside the window looked harmless but felt wrong in my chest. The number on the screen was familiar. Eleanor, my oldest friend, the kind of woman who never calls before noon unless something is broken. I answered with a smile in my voice. Eleanor, what in the world are you doing up so early? But her breath caught before she spoke, and I knew this was not a casual call. Margaret, she said, her voice thin and trembling. It's Thomas. They've taken him to the hospital. Poisoning, they think. Just like that, no hello, no gentle introduction. Poisoning. The word pressed against my ear like ice. My hand gripped the kitchen counter, steadying myself against a world that had tilted without warning. Poisoning, I repeated, as though saying it aloud would somehow rearrange the letters into something less deadly. Yes, Eleanor whispered. They don't know what it was. He collapsed after dinner last night, and the doctors, well, they said it's something they rarely see. The silence that followed felt too loud. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the distant bark of a neighbour's dog, the tick of the wall clock, everything ordinary against the weight of something extraordinary. My brother was already gone. I'd buried him years ago. But Eleanor's brother Thomas, he was like family to me. The boy who once carried my school books when my arm was in a sling, the man who fixed my leaky faucet when I couldn't afford a plumber. The thought of him lying in a hospital bed with poison in his veins made my throat close. I wanted to say something comforting, something strong, but all I managed was, I'll come. Right now. I hung up before Eleanor could argue and stood in the middle of the kitchen with my keys in one hand and my phone in the other. The ordinary morning around me, the half-drunk cup of coffee, the unopened newspaper, suddenly felt like props on a stage I no longer belonged to. I thought of Thomas's laugh, deep and contagious, and wondered who could want to silence it. The idea of poisoning wasn't an accident, wasn't clumsy, it was deliberate. And deliberate meant dangerous. On the drive to the hospital, the world outside the windshield blurred. The trees, the houses, the familiar streets, they looked the same, but they felt like they were hiding something. Every red light seemed to last too long. Every shadow felt heavier than it should. And in that silence between the beats of my heart, a truth settled in my chest. Whatever had happened to Thomas, it was only the beginning. And if I didn't step carefully, if I didn't keep my eyes open, it might become my story too. When I came back from the hospital that evening, the house felt different. It wasn't that anything had moved. The chairs were in their usual places, the stack of bills still sat unopened on the counter, and the faint smell of lavender from yesterday's cleaning lingered in the air. No, it was me. I had walked out that morning as one woman and come back as another. A woman who could no longer trust the stillness of her own walls. I hung my coat by the door, but I didn't switch on the television like I usually do. Instead, I walked straight to the kitchen, my mind restless, searching for something I couldn't yet name. It was then I noticed the bottle. It sat on the top shelf of the cupboard, half hidden behind a dusty vase I'd meant to throw out years ago. A bottle of wine, deep green glass, the kind that catches the light and makes you wonder what's inside. I pulled it down slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hand. The label was foreign, the letters curling in a language I couldn't pronounce. My niece, Claire, had given it to me last Christmas. For when you're ready to celebrate again, Aunt Margaret, she'd said, her smile too careful, as if she knew celebration was a fragile thing in my life. I hadn't opened it. Not then, not ever. The truth is, since my husband Richard passed, I'd avoided wine altogether. He used to pour us each a glass at dinner, and drinking without him felt like inviting a ghost to the table. Still, I held the bottle up to the kitchen light, studying it now with new eyes. The cork looked untouched, the seal unbroken. And yet, something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the weight, just a little too heavy. Maybe it was the sound when I tilted it, liquid moving slower than it should. Or maybe it was simply the morning's phone call echoing through my head, making everything seem suspicious. I set the bottle down on the counter, staring at it as though it might speak. Was it truly a gift, or something else? My mind began to loop. What if Thomas had been given something like this? What if his collapse wasn't random at all? I told myself not to be dramatic, not to let grief twist into paranoia. But then I remembered the words Eleanor had whispered. They don't know what it was. Poison doesn't wear a label. It doesn't warn you before it enters your body. It dresses itself up as something ordinary. A drink, a meal, a small gesture wrapped as kindness. The house was quiet and I was alone. Richard's absence was louder than any silence. I touched the bottle once more, then pulled my hand away as if it had burned me. A gift, yes, but a gift can also be a test. And I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, someone was waiting to see if I would take the first sip. The hospital corridors always smell the same, antiseptic and something metallic, like the air itself has been scrubbed too clean. I walked them slowly, the low hum of fluorescent lights pressing against my temples. At the end of the hall, Eleanor sat hunched on a hard plastic chair, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles shone pale. She looked up when she saw me, eyes red-rimmed but her voice steady. He's still unconscious. They think it's his heart. I sat beside her, the chair groaning under my weight, and put my hand gently over hers. His heart, I repeated, trying to make the words feel solid, but they slipped away like smoke. Thomas had always been careful, never missed his checkups, ate like a man who knew time was precious. He wasn't careless. I kept that thought locked in the front of my mind, though saying it aloud felt like shouting against a closed door. The doctor came by a few minutes later, a man younger than my own children, with tired eyes and a clipped way of speaking. His vitals are stable now, but we're running more tests. The arrhythmia could have been triggered by any number of factors: stress, dehydration, medication interaction. He looked at his chart instead of at us, as though the answers lived only on paper. We'll know more in the morning. Eleanor nodded, grateful for any words that sounded like reassurance. But me, I couldn't shake the way his explanation felt too neat, too practiced. When the doctor left, I leaned closer to Eleanor. Did they test for toxins? I whispered. She blinked at me as if I'd spoken another language. Poison, Eleanor. Did they check? Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. Margaret, that's not something we should say out loud. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the same unease that had taken root in mine. Maybe she didn't want to believe it, but belief and instinct are two different things, and instinct was already whispering in her ear. We sat in silence until the nurse came in to check the monitors, a kind woman with soft shoes and a voice that barely disturbed the air. His pulse is steady. That's a good sign. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When she left, I caught the faintest murmur as the door swung shut. Not normal for someone his age. I don't think she meant for us to hear it, but I did. And it tightened something deep in my chest. Eleanor leaned back, closing her eyes, but I kept mine open, watching the steady rise and fall of Thomas's chest, the fragile machinery keeping him tethered to this side of life. They could call it heart trouble if they wanted. They could say words like arrhythmia and irregular rhythm. But I knew in my bones something else had crawled into his body, quiet and deliberate, and it wasn't going to show itself on any chart. Clara arrived at the hospital just after dusk, a paper cup of coffee in her hand and a smile fixed so perfectly on her face that it made my skin prickle. She moved with a kind of rehearsed grace, her heels tapping softly against the tiles, her voice pitched just right when she said, "How's Uncle Thomas?" Almost too calm, almost like she'd practiced in the mirror. Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand, relief flooding her tired face. Stable, they say. We'll know more tomorrow. Clara nodded, brushing a strand of her sleek hair behind her ear, and her smile didn't waver. Not once. Not when her mother's voice cracked. Not when she looked at her uncle lying still under the fluorescent glow. If anything, her smile sharpened. I watched her carefully. I've always believed people reveal themselves in the quiet spaces, how their eyes move, how their fingers fidget, how their breath quickens when no one's looking. Clara's eyes didn't linger on Thomas. They skimmed past him just enough to appear dutiful, then back to her phone, where her thumb hovered without moving. She wasn't nervous. She was… what? Waiting? Measuring? I couldn't tell. But the smile stayed, steady and bright, like porcelain. She caught me watching and tilted her head, still smiling. "Margaret, you look exhausted. You should go home. Get some rest." The words were gentle, but something beneath them felt like dismissal. Like I'd overstayed my welcome in a room I had every right to occupy. I forced a small laugh. "We're all exhausted, Clara. Some of us just show it differently." Her eyes flashed, quick and sharp, then the smile returned. "I suppose?" She sat down beside her mother, crossed her legs neatly and sipped her coffee as though this were any ordinary evening. But it wasn't. Not with Thomas hooked to machines, not with doctors scratching their heads, not with a bottle of wine sitting on my kitchen shelf. The same bottle Clara had given me with the same smile she was wearing now. I thought of the way she'd pressed it into my hands at Christmas, her voice light. "For you, Aunt Margaret. You deserve something special." Back then, I'd taken it as kindness. Now, with Thomas lying in that bed, I wasn't so sure. Eleanor leaned into Clara, whispering something I couldn't hear. Clara laughed softly, a sound polished smooth, practiced. My gaze lingered on her smile again. Too steady, too perfect. The kind of smile that hides its teeth. Families break in quiet ways. Not always with shouting, not always with slammed doors. Sometimes they splinter in the gaps left by inheritances, by favours never returned, by years of whispered resentments. Watching Clara now, her calm sharper than fear, I wondered if we were looking at one of those breaks made flesh. And the thought chilled me more than the hospital air ever could. The memory hit me like a draft through a cracked window, sudden, cold, impossible to ignore. The wine bottle. Not just the bottle itself, but the folded note that had been tucked neatly into its box. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. A slip of paper, Clara's handwriting maybe, looping letters with a flourish that always felt a bit showy. I remembered the words, or rather the way they looked, faintly slanted, written quickly, like she hadn't wanted anyone to read too closely. Something about, "Enjoy this. It's rare." My mind replayed the image like a slide held up to the light. Only now, I realised, I hadn't seen that note since. When I got home that night, the house greeted me with its usual silence. I locked the door, switched on the lamp by the entryway, and stood still listening. Nothing but the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the old wall clock. I set my bag down, but my pulse was racing in a way it hadn't in years. I went straight to the kitchen, to the cabinet where I'd placed the box. The bottle was there. The cardboard, too. But the folded slip of paper, gone. I emptied the box onto the counter, shook it, turned it upside down, ran my fingers along the inside seams like a detective desperate for evidence. Nothing. The note was missing. I stood there, staring at the empty space where it should have been, and felt the back of my neck prickle. Maybe I'd misplaced it. Maybe I'd thrown it away without thinking. But I knew myself better than that. I keep everything. Receipts, letters, ticket stubs. Old habits from a life where losing track meant losing control. That note should have been there. I turned slowly, scanning the kitchen. The chair by the table wasn't angled the way I usually leave it. The little rug near the sink had shifted slightly, its edge curling up. Small things, easy to dismiss. But when you live alone, the details become part of you, as familiar as the lines on your hands. Someone had been here. The thought lodged deep in my chest. I checked the doors again, locked, the windows latched, nothing broken, no forced entry. And yet, the note was gone, as though plucked carefully, deliberately, without a trace. I leaned against the counter, my fingers gripping the cool surface. If the note was missing, it meant two things. First, that I wasn't imagining this. Something was wrong with that bottle. And second, that someone else knew I'd noticed. The house felt different now, not like shelter, but like a stage that had already been entered, rearranged, touched by hands that weren't mine. For the first time in years, I wished my husband were still alive, someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But all I had was the silence, the bottle, and the certainty that I was no longer the only one in my own home. I have always believed that when the mind races, the hand must steady it. That night, after the note vanished like it had never existed, I sat down at the kitchen table with my old leather-bound journal. The one I hadn't opened since Richard passed. Its pages smelled faintly of dust and time, like something kept waiting too long. I pulled out a pen, drew a sharp line down the middle of the first blank sheet, and labelled the columns. On the left, I wrote what I know. On the right, what I can prove. I stared at the words for a long time before my hand began to move. Under what I know, the list came quick, jagged, each entry scratching like a stone on glass. Clara gave me the bottle. Clara was calm at the hospital, too calm. There was a note in the box. Now the note is gone. The bottle doesn't feel right. My brother-in-law is in a hospital bed with symptoms that don't add up. I paused, pressing the pen to the paper until it left a dark blot. Then I moved to the other side of the line. What I can prove. Gary's lab tests. No, I didn't have Gary. That was someone else's story. All I had was me. Proof. The bottle exists. It came from Clara, she handed it to me herself. Proof. My brother-in-law is ill. The hospital charts will say his heart failed, but I know it wasn't only that. Proof. The note. No, I can't prove it anymore. It's gone. I set the pen down and rubbed my eyes. The page already felt like a courtroom, my words standing trial. The left column swelled with certainty. The right shrank under the weight of absence. A jury would laugh at it. But this wasn't for a jury, not yet. This was for me. A way to keep from drowning in questions with no anchor. I closed my eyes and whispered the words aloud, the way I used to when memorizing recipes or shopping lists. Clara gave me the bottle. The note is gone. Someone has been inside my house. The rhythm of it sounded like scripture, or maybe a curse. The refrigerator hummed again, steady, uncaring. The clock ticked on. I sat there with my lists and felt the edges of fear settle into something colder, more deliberate. Fear can freeze a person, but written down, fear becomes order. I flipped to the next page and left it blank, ready for tomorrow's truths, whatever they might be. I closed the journal and set it carefully in the drawer beside the table. My hand lingered on the wood, as though it could keep the words safe. I told myself I wasn't just an aging woman imagining shadows. I was a witness, even if the world didn't believe me yet. And witnesses write things down, because one day when the truth finally crawls out into the light, the record is all that's left between madness and memory. Clara's house sat on the edge of town, one of those new builds with bright siding and a lawn too perfectly trimmed, the kind of place that looks staged rather than lived in. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, my fingers curled tight around the steering wheel. From the outside, the house glowed warm with light, curtains drawn just so, as though Clara knew exactly how it should appear to a passing eye. Perfect. Inviting. Untouchable. She opened the door almost before I knocked, her smile already in place. "Aunt Margaret, what a surprise!" Her tone was honey-sweet, but the surprise didn't reach her eyes. She stepped back to let me in, and I walked across the polished floorboards that reflected the overhead lights like water. Everything smelled faintly of lavender, sharp and artificial, like a candle trying too hard to be a garden. The living room was spotless, too spotless. Not a single cushion out of place, no newspaper on the coffee table, not even a stray mug left from the morning. A house without fingerprints, without accidents, without evidence of real life. My eyes wandered to the bookshelf. The spines were lined up in military precision. Gardening guides, herbal medicine manuals, titles I didn't recognize with words like extraction, distillation, toxicity. I paused, letting my finger brush one of the bindings. Clara noticed. "I've been experimenting," she said lightly as though the word held no weight. "Herbal teas, natural remedies. You know, people waste so much on pharmaceuticals when nature gives us everything." Her laugh was quick, almost brittle. "It's just a hobby." I nodded, but my gaze had already drifted to the corner of the room. A shelf near the kitchen doorway lined with glass jars. Some were filled with dried leaves, others with pale twisted roots. Labels written in her handwriting: valerian, foxglove, belladonna. Plants that whispered warnings even in silence. My stomach tightened. "Interesting collection," I murmured. Clara's smile sharpened. "It's all harmless. Decorative, really." She picked up one jar, turning it so the light caught the dried petals inside. "Pretty, don't you think?" "Pretty, yes. But deadly too if you knew what you were doing." I sank onto her spotless sofa, the cushions giving just enough to suggest comfort, but not enough to feel used. "How are you holding up with everything?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. Clara tilted her head, sipping from a glass of water she'd poured for herself, not offering one to me. "I'm fine. Uncle Thomas is strong. He'll recover." The words were right, but the tone was wrong, like she was reading them from a script she'd written herself. I let the silence stretch between us, my eyes drifting once more to the jars on the shelf. The house was too clean, the smile too steady, the plants too carefully dried and labelled. It all fit together like a puzzle whose picture I already knew, though I couldn't yet name. When I left, the lavender scent clung to my coat. Too sweet, too perfect. And on the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking. It's the perfect houses that hide the darkest rooms. I don't know what finally pushed me to ask the question out loud. Maybe it was the way Clara's smile never cracked, not once. Maybe it was the jars of dried plants, their labels like a roll call of poisons. Or maybe it was the memory of Thomas, lying in that hospital bed, pale and unmoving, while the machines breathed for him. Whatever it was, the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Clara," I said, my voice low, steady, "did you know there was something wrong with that wine?" The air shifted. It was subtle, but I felt it. The tick of the clock on the wall seemed louder. The hum of the refrigerator stretched into the silence that followed. Clara didn't answer. She didn't laugh, didn't feign confusion, didn't rush to reassure me. She just sat there, her glass of water halfway to her lips, frozen mid-motion. Seconds stretched long. My heart thudded against my ribs, each beat like a hammer. Her eyes flicked toward me, just once, quick, sharp, like the glance of someone deciding how much to reveal. Then she set the glass down carefully on the table, the sound of it against the wood too loud in the stillness. She smiled, that same practiced smile, but thinner now, stretched tight. "Why would you ask me that?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped in my lap so tightly the knuckles ached. "Because I found the box empty. The note you wrote is gone. And because Thomas nearly died after you gave me that bottle. Tell me it's a coincidence." "Tell me I'm wrong." Clara tilted her head, her hair falling like a curtain across her cheek. For a moment she looked younger, like the little girl I once knew, who used to braid my hair clumsily in the summers. But then, the moment passed. Her eyes hardened, and she leaned back, crossing her legs with deliberate calm. "People see what they want to see, Aunt Margaret. she said softly. Sometimes they even invent what isn't there. The silence after that hung heavier than any words. She didn't deny it. She didn't admit it either. Just left the pause sitting between us like a third presence in the room. I stood slowly, my knees stiff. My coat felt heavier on my shoulders as I pulled it on. "You didn't answer my question," I said. Clara's smile flickered, just a flicker, but it was enough. "Maybe there wasn't one to answer." I walked out into the night air, my breath clouding in front of me. The silence she'd given me echoed louder than a scream. And I knew. Sometimes the pause tells you more than the reply ever could. The next morning I opened the drawer by my bed and pulled out a small black recorder I hadn't touched in years. It was Richard's once, back when he liked to tape notes for himself, reminders, shopping lists, little fragments of thought he swore he'd forget if they weren't captured. After he died, I tucked it away, telling myself I'd never need it. But now, holding its weight in my palm, I felt something shift inside me. This time it wasn't about remembering. It was about proving. I slipped fresh batteries inside, pressed the red button, and listened to the tiny click as the machine hummed to life. "Test," I whispered, my own voice crackling back a second later, thinner but clear. That was enough. I slipped it into the pocket of my coat. From now on I would carry it everywhere. Not because I planned to corner Clara again, but because I understood something too many people learn too late. Your word means nothing without proof. And I was terrified of becoming the woman everyone thought was simply paranoid, grieving, imagining ghosts. All morning I practiced in my head how I would speak into it if I had to. Phrases short, precise, like I was already giving testimony. She handed me the bottle. The note was missing. The chair was moved. Each line sounded almost ridiculous, but when I played them back, they became steady anchors in the storm. The truth is, after 50 years of life, you learn that women like me, widows, quiet, ordinary, aren't often heard when it matters most. People smile politely, nod, and dismiss. So I decided I wouldn't just speak. I would record. I would collect. Every silence, every word left hanging in the air, I would turn into evidence. That night, I left the recorder on the table beside me as I wrote in my journal. I pressed the button before I spoke out loud, reading my list. What I know, what I can prove. The recorder caught it all, the scratch of my pen, the tremor in my voice, the silence when I didn't know what to write next. Somehow that gave me comfort. Proof not only for others, but for myself. Proof that I wasn't imagining any of this. When I tucked the recorder back into my coat pocket, I whispered to the empty room, "You won't erase me. Not this time." The words lingered in the air, captured forever in that tiny device. And for the first time since the bottle appeared, I felt like I wasn't entirely defenseless. A woman with a recorder may not look dangerous, but a woman who refuses to be silenced, she is. Detective Harris was younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, with a face that looked like it had seen more long nights than good ones. His suit was plain, his tie a little crooked, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd learned to listen before speaking. When he came to my door that Tuesday afternoon, badge in hand, I felt the house itself exhale. At last, someone who might take me seriously. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written my lists, where Richard and I had once shared morning coffee. Harris placed a small notebook in front of him, flipping it open, his pen poised. "Mrs. Margaret Lane?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes," I said. My voice came out steady, steadier than I felt. "You reported concerns about a bottle of wine and a missing note," he continued. "Tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Clara, about the gift, about the hospital, about the silence after my question. I even pulled out the recorder, pressed play, and let him hear my own voice from the night before. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss. He just nodded, scribbling in his notebook with quick, sharp strokes. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, pen resting against the page. "You're right to be cautious," he said at last. "I've seen enough to know when a story doesn't sit clean. And yours," he tapped the notebook, "has edges." Relief washed over me, but it didn't last. His expression shifted, serious, like a teacher about to deliver bad news. "But I need you to hear me clearly. Do not meet with your niece alone. Not in her house, not here, not anywhere private." The words settled heavy between us. "You think she's dangerous," I whispered. "I think she's comfortable with things most people wouldn't even touch," Harris replied. "And I think if she feels cornered, she won't hesitate to act. Poison isn't a casual choice, Mrs. Lane. It's deliberate, controlled, and it's rarely a first experiment." My hands curled around the edge of the table. "So what do I do?" "Exactly what you're doing," he said. "Document. Record. Tell me everything. And wait. We'll move when the time is right, but promise me." His gaze locked onto mine, unblinking. "You won't face her alone again." I nodded, the weight of his words pressing into my chest. Harris closed his notebook, slid it into his jacket, and stood. At the door, he paused. "You're not imagining this, Margaret. You're in the middle of something real, and real can be dangerous." After he left, I stood in the quiet kitchen, my hand resting on the recorder in my pocket. His warning echoed louder than the silence Clara had left me with. Don't meet her alone, not ever. It was near dusk when I first noticed it, the kind of hour when shadows stretch long across the street and every creak of the house feels sharper than it should. I had just pulled the curtains closed when I saw movement at the edge of my yard. Not a clear figure, not enough to name, just a shift. A darker patch of dark that didn't belong. My breath caught. I stood still, hand on the fabric, willing myself not to move. The street outside looked empty. The maple tree across the road swayed with the evening breeze, its branches scraping against one another like whispers. But something was there. I knew it the way you know when someone's staring at you even before you turn your head. I waited. Nothing. No car pulling away, no footsteps crunching on gravel, no neighbour walking a dog. Just the long silence of twilight pressing in. At last, I let the curtain fall and stepped back, heart pounding steady, too steady, as if even it knew I had to listen carefully. Inside, the house looked normal, everything in its place. The throw blanket folded on the armchair, the teacup I hadn't washed yet sitting by the sink, Richard's photograph on the mantel, smiling that gentle smile that used to calm me. But the air felt different. Not wrong exactly, just shifted, as though someone had breathed in my space while I was gone and left a trace of themselves behind. I walked the room slowly, hands clasped behind my back the way my father used to do when checking the locks at night. Front door, secure. Back door, locked, windows all latched, nothing disturbed. Yet when I opened the hall closet to hang my coat, the smell hit me. Lavender. Sharp, sweet, unmistakable. The same too perfect scent that clung to Clara's living room. I froze, staring at the row of coats. My own, Richard's old one, a rain jacket I hadn't worn in months. All hanging as they should. I ran my fingers along the sleeves, half expecting to find one moved, one shifted. Nothing. Still the lavender lingered, and I knew it hadn't come from me. I stepped back, my throat dry. Whoever had been here hadn't wanted to take anything. They wanted me to know, to feel their presence, to sit in my own home and wonder if the air I breathed still belonged to me. I reached into my coat pocket, pressed the recorder's red button, and whispered, "Someone has been in my house." No sign of entry, no missing items, but the lavender scent is here. My voice trembled, but the click told me it was captured. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then steadied. Watching, waiting. And I knew. I wasn't imagining this. Someone was watching me. The morning felt almost ordinary at first. A pale sun slanted through the blinds, the kettle hissed on the stove, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to think maybe I had dreamed the lavender, the shadow outside, the heavy silence. But when I opened the front door to fetch the paper, the world shifted again. There it was, a single sheet of paper taped crooked to the wood just above the doorknob, white against the faded blue paint, flapping slightly in the breeze. I didn't need to read it to know my stomach was already sinking. Still, my eyes found the words. Thick black letters, jagged, rushed, and angry. Stop digging or you'll regret it. That was all. 7 words, but they hit harder than a scream. My hand tightened on the edge of the door, the paper rattling in the wind. Whoever had written this knew exactly where I lived, knew where to place it so I couldn't miss it. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't clever. It was personal. A message meant to lodge under my skin and stay there. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My chest rose shallow, air scraping like gravel. Images flashed. Thomas in the hospital, Clara's practiced smile, the missing note, the scent of lavender in my closet. And now this. The threat was no longer hidden in silence or suggestion. It was staring at me in block letters. I pulled the paper free, hands trembling, and stepped inside, shutting the door with a firm click. I laid it flat on the kitchen table and stared at it as though it might explain itself. My fingers itched to crumple it, to throw it away, but I knew better. I pressed the recorder's button instead. This morning, August 12th, I said, my voice tight. A note was taped to my door, words written in thick black ink. Stop digging or you'll regret it. No signature, no envelope. Direct threat. Hearing my own voice describe it made the fear sharper, realer. My throat burned. I sat down hard, palms pressed against the cool wood of the table. I felt the sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not now. I folded the note carefully, slid it into a plastic sleeve I'd taken from Richard's old office supplies. My hands were steadier when they had a task. Evidence. Always evidence. But deep inside, a different voice whispered, this wasn't just about Thomas or the wine or even Clara. This was about me, about pushing me back into silence, the place women like me are supposed to stay. I pressed the recorder again. I will not stop. The words came out small, but they were mine, and they were recorded. That afternoon, I went to the hall closet, the same place where Richard used to keep his important papers, and pulled down the old fireproof box. It was heavy, not just with its weight, but with memory. The kind of box meant for deeds and birth certificates, for the practical things of a life, not for fear. But as I carried it to the kitchen table, I knew what it was going to hold now. My truth. I laid everything out first, careful, deliberate. The bottle of wine Clara had given me, still sealed, its dark glass catching the late light like a secret that refused to stay buried. The small recorder already filled with whispers and confessions, the little red button ready to capture more. The folded plastic sleeve with the threat, stop digging or you'll regret it, still staring through the clear surface like it wanted to climb out. My journal pages torn neatly from the notebook, where I had written what I know, what I can prove. Each item its own chapter, its own wound. One by one, I placed them inside the box. The sound was soft, glass against metal, paper sliding on plastic, the click of the recorder as I checked it once more. But to me, it felt like nails into wood, building something solid out of everything that had been trying to break me apart. When the last page was inside, I paused. My hand hovered over the lid, not ready to close it. I reached for a photograph from the drawer, the last one I had of Richard and me together, his arm around me, both of us smiling as if life would never turn cruel. I slipped it on top, not because it was evidence, but because it was reason. Reason to keep going, to keep breathing, to refuse to be erased. I closed the lid slowly, the latch snapping shut with a sound that echoed in the kitchen. Then I pressed the recorder's button again. Today, I began keeping everything in the fireproof box. The bottle, the note, the words, the proof. If anything happens, this is where the truth lives. Hearing it played back steadied me. Proof that I wasn't only afraid, I was fighting. I slid the box back onto the top shelf, high enough that I had to stretch, the way Richard used to do. Out of easy reach, but not out of sight. I stood there a long moment, hand resting on the closed lid, and whispered, "I'm gathering the truth now. Piece by piece, you can threaten me, you can watch me, but you cannot take this from me." The house was quiet, but the box, my box, felt like it was listening. That night the house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that makes you think of old photographs and unanswered questions. I sat in the living room with the fireproof box still heavy in my mind, and my thoughts drifted back. Not to the note on the door, not even to Thomas lying pale in that hospital bed, but to Clara. Little Clara with pigtails and scraped knees, looking up at me like I could fix the whole world with just a hug. I remembered the day she came to live with me. She was 9, small for her age, her hands clenched around a stuffed rabbit so worn its ear dangled by a thread. Her parents, my brother and his wife, were gone in an instant, a car crash on a wet road, and suddenly Clara was standing on my porch in the rain. I had just lost Richard then too, my grief still raw, and yet, when I saw her eyes, wide and lost, I knew my own pain had to wait. She needed me more. I taught her how to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, even when she spilled half the batter. I tucked her in at night with stories about brave women who found light in the dark. When she had nightmares, she'd sneak into my room and curl up at the edge of the bed, and I'd stroke her hair until she slept again. At school events, when other children had parents cheering, she had me. I clapped until my hands stung, shouted her name louder than anyone else. On her 13th birthday, she told me she wished her real parents could see her blow out the candles. But then she added softly, "I'm glad I have you, Aunt Margaret." I held that memory like a jewel for years. The way her smile reached her eyes, the way she hugged me so tight my ribs ached, and now I had to set it beside the woman who gave me that bottle, who smiled with lips but not with eyes, who left a note that said, "Stop digging." How could the same child grow into this stranger? I closed my eyes and whispered, "Clara, where did I lose you?" Was it in high school when she began locking her bedroom door? Was it in college when she stopped calling as often? Was it when money and inheritance began to matter more than trust? Or had the seeds been there all along, hidden, waiting for the soil of adulthood to let them grow? The recorder was still in my pocket. I pressed it on without thinking. "I raised her," I said softly. "I held her through the nights. I gave her everything I had left. And yet here we are. Family doesn't always mean safe. Sometimes it means danger wearing a familiar face." The words lingered in the air long after I clicked it off. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic, the way places of survival often do. I walked the corridor slowly, my shoes echoing too loud against the linoleum, until I reached Thomas's room. For days he had been a still figure against the white sheets, machines doing the work his body couldn't. But today his eyes were open. I paused at the doorway, afraid to hope, afraid that if I blinked he might vanish back into that terrible silence. But then he saw me, and his lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Margaret." His voice was raspy, broken glass, smoothed just enough to pass for sound. I went to his side, taking his hand gently in mine. It was warm now, not cold like before, though his grip was weak. "I'm here, Thomas," I whispered. "You scared me half to death." His chest rose slowly, a painful climb for each breath. "What happened?" he asked, though I could tell he already knew it wasn't just his heart. "The doctors say it looked like your heart gave out," I said carefully. "But I think it was something else. Something put in you, Thomas. Something meant to harm." My words trembled, but I forced them out. I needed him to hear the truth, even if it frightened us both. His eyes closed for a moment, then opened again, sharper this time. He licked his lips, swallowed hard, and whispered, "Clara." Just her name, but heavy, weighted, carrying more than I could bear. I held my breath. "Thomas?" His gaze locked on mine, tired but steady. "You too, Margaret. Do you think it was Clara?" The words sank into me like stones into water, rippling everything. For weeks I had felt like the mad one, the woman who saw shadows and whispered suspicions into a recorder. But here was Thomas, frail and tethered to tubes, daring to ask what I hadn't said aloud. He knew. Or at least he suspected. I squeezed his hand. "Yes," I whispered. "I think so." His eyes filled with something between sorrow and understanding. "She was always so clever," he said softly, as if remembering another lifetime. A little girl who once climbed trees faster than the boys. "But clever can turn sharp, can't it?" I nodded, my throat thick. "It can cut." The machines beeped steadily between us, marking time we didn't have to count. For the first time since this began, I felt less alone. Terrified, yes, but no longer carrying the suspicion by myself. Thomas closed his eyes again, his hand still in mine, and murmured, "Then we have to be careful. Very careful." And I knew he was right. The truth had spoken, and it had spoken through him. The phone rang just as the evening shadows stretched across the kitchen floor. I almost didn't answer. I'd grown used to letting calls slip into silence, afraid of what voices might wait on the other end. But something in me, stubborn or foolish, made me pick it up. "Margaret," came the voice, warm, smooth, practiced. "Clara." For a moment I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, my fingers gripping the receiver so hard the plastic creaked. "Clara," I managed, my tone flat. "I was thinking," she said, her words draped in casual sweetness. "Maybe we could meet tomorrow, just you and me, like old times." Old times. My mind shot back to the little girl with the stuffed rabbit, the young woman with nervous eyes on her first day of college. But the memory soured instantly, replaced with the image of the wine bottle, the missing note, the threat on my door. Like old times. She wanted me to believe. But this wasn't old times. This was now. I swallowed, listening to the pause that followed, the silence carefully placed, as though she knew I'd be hesitating. "Somewhere quiet," Clara added. "I know you've been under so much stress. We could talk it through. Clear the air." The kindness in her voice was a performance, every syllable wrapped like a gift with poison tucked inside. My skin prickled. I imagined the hospital monitors beside Thomas's bed, his voice whispering Clara's name with sorrow. And now here she was, offering me kindness, her trap baited with nostalgia. "I don't know, Clara," I said, keeping my tone steady, neutral. "You don't trust me?" she asked lightly, though the edge beneath her words was sharp. I let silence answer. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I remembered Detective Harris's warning, "Don't meet her alone." And yet here she was, dangling the invitation as though it were mercy. Finally, I said, "I'll think about it." She laughed softly, a sound that once would have made me smile. "Don't think too long, Aunt Margaret. Some things are best said face to face. Tomorrow evening, the park bench near the fountain. You'll know the one." And then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of her words sinking into me. A simple invitation, framed as kindness, but every instinct screamed it was something else. I set the phone down, reached for the recorder in my pocket, and spoke into the quiet. "Clara wants to meet. She says it's to clear the air, but I know better. It's not a meeting, it's a trap, and I won't walk into it blind." The call from Detective Harris came just after dawn, his voice clipped, urgent. "Margaret, stay home today. We're moving on Clara's house. We have the warrant." For a moment I couldn't breathe. All the whispers, the shadows, the quiet threats. They were finally being dragged into the light. I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear. Will you tell me what you find? You'll know soon enough, Harris said, then hung up. The hours stretched thin, every tick of the clock in my kitchen louder than the last. I sat by the window, the fireproof box on the table beside me like a silent companion. The sun crept higher, painting the room in gold, but nothing eased the tension in my chest. It wasn't until nearly noon that Harris called again. His voice was steadier this time, but I could hear the undercurrent of weight behind each word. We found them, Margaret. Jars, dozens of them. Labelled, categorised, plants, powders. White snake root, dried and ground. Extracts in little vials. Pages of notes on dosages. Test results. I closed my eyes, my hand trembling against the phone. So it's true, I whispered. It's more than true, Harris said. It's deliberate. She kept records. Meticulous, scientific almost. Dates, initials, dosage amounts, enough to show she wasn't experimenting for curiosity. She was testing, practicing. The words struck like stones. Clara's careful handwriting, once used to write thank you notes and school essays, now spelling out the weight of poison. What about people? I asked, my voice barely holding. There was a pause. Then Harris said, We can't prove she gave it to anyone else yet, but the notes mention Thomas by name. And you, Margaret. She was planning, calculating. I felt the world tilt, the air heavy and sharp. My own name written down like a target in my niece's careful script. They'll bring the evidence in tonight, Harris continued. This isn't speculation anymore, it's proof. We'll be building the case from here. When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the box beside me. Inside were my scraps of truth. The bottle, the note, my words on tape. But now the police had jars, papers, vials. The picture was no longer fragments. It was forming into something undeniable. I reached for the recorder, pressing the button with unsteady fingers. They searched Clara's house today. They found the plants, the powders, the notes, my name among them. The truth I feared is now a truth they can hold in their hands. She's not just family anymore. She's evidence, and evidence speaks louder than blood. The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. For the first time, I wasn't just a frightened woman with suspicions. I was a witness. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper, the kind of place where truth is meant to stand taller than lies. I sat on the hard wooden bench, my hands folded tight in my lap, waiting for my name to be called. Around me the air buzzed with low murmurs, but inside my chest there was only the slow, steady hammer of my heart. When the bailiff called, Margaret Ellis, my knees almost buckled, but I stood. I walked the aisle to the witness stand, each step a lifetime. The oath was spoken, my hand raised, and then I sat down before the microphone, its silver head gleaming like an unblinking eye. The prosecutor's voice was calm, guiding. He asked me to tell the court how I received the bottle of wine, who gave it, what happened to my brother after it was opened. I spoke carefully, steady, forcing my voice not to break. It was a gift from my niece Clara, I said. It was meant for my brother Thomas. He drank it, and within hours he was in the hospital, fighting for his life. The words felt heavy in the open air. I had carried them alone, whispered them into a recorder, shared them in quiet rooms. Now they were out in the world, where strangers would measure them, weigh them, decide if they were enough. Then came the defense. Clara's lawyer, sharp in a grey suit, leaned in as though he could peel the truth off me with his questions. He asked if I had proof that Clara had meant harm. He asked if I could be mistaken about her handwriting, about her smile, about her intent. Each question was a blade, but I answered calmly, steadily, never looking away from the truth I knew. And then, when I least expected it, My eyes met Clara's. She sat across the room, her hair neat, her blouse pale against the wooden chair. But it wasn't her posture or her lawyer or the shuffle of papers that cut through me. It was her gaze. She looked at me, straight at me. And in that silence, in that unwavering stare, was everything she couldn't say aloud. No apology, no denial. Just a cold, sharp recognition. As if she were daring me to keep speaking, daring me to hold the line between blood and justice. My throat tightened, but I did not look away. I held her gaze, my words steady into the microphone. I loved her like a daughter. But love does not erase the truth. The courtroom hushed. Even the shuffle of papers seemed to stop. It wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a fracture, carved deep and final, for everyone to see. The air in the courtroom was thick, every breath heavy with waiting. The jury filed back in, their faces drawn, pale, carrying the weight of 12 lives colliding with one truth. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the whole room might hear it. The judge asked for the verdict. The foreman stood, a slip of paper trembling slightly in his hand. His voice was steady, though, as he read, "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty." The words struck the room like a hammer. Guilty. A sound too sharp to echo, too final to soften. Around me there was a rustle of movement, a few gasps, a low whisper. But I heard none of it. I heard only the ringing in my ears, the slow exhale of relief and sorrow mingled in my chest. Thomas, still weak, sat beside me, his cane clutched like a shield. His eyes closed briefly, and I knew he was thanking heaven that justice had spoken. But my eyes, against my will, drifted to Clara. She sat motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face calm, almost serene. But when she lifted her gaze and met mine, the stillness broke. Her eyes locked onto me with a sharpness I hadn't seen since she was a girl who refused to lose an argument. No fear, no regret, just that unyielding spark. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the room. The world faded. The judge, the lawyers, the murmurs of the gallery. It was just Clara and me, aunt and niece, family turned stranger. Her lips moved barely enough to catch. 3 words whispered like a curse or a promise. "You'll never understand why." The chill of it slid down my spine. What did she mean? Was it spite, a final attempt to wound? Or was there some darker truth buried beneath? Something I hadn't seen, some reason twisted beyond recognition? The bailiff touched her arm, guiding her to stand. Shackles clinked faintly as they led her away. But she didn't look down. She kept her eyes on me until the last possible moment, until the door closed between us. I sat frozen, the verdict echoing in my mind. Guilty. Justice. Yes. Safety, perhaps. But closure? No. Not with those words still ringing in my ears. You'll never understand why. As I left the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cut across the steps, warm and blinding. I paused there, breathing the free air, yet feeling the weight of a story unfinished pressing on my shoulders. She was gone, but not gone. Her shadow lingered still. The trial was over. The courthouse steps were empty, the whispers already fading into the corners of town gossip. But in my house, in my chest, the echoes remained. For days after, I woke at dawn without an alarm, the silence around me too sharp, as if the walls were still listening for Clara's footsteps. The fireproof box sat where it always had, heavier now, filled not only with proof, but with memory. This morning, though, I carried my coffee out to the porch. The air was cool, the light soft and forgiving, and the swing no longer creaked after I finally fixed its chains. I lowered myself onto it, the mug warming my hands, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe without expecting the phone to ring. I thought of Clara, her eyes in that last moment, the way she said I'd never understand why. Maybe she was right. Maybe I never will. and maybe that's not the point. Understanding doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't bring back trust. What matters is what I choose to do now, with the hours still ahead of me. Thomas is recovering. His laughter has started to return, cautious but real, and when he calls me, I hear more life in his voice each time. Detective Harris still checks in now and then, his words short, steady, like he knows I need less protection now and more permission to start living again. Even Gary from the lab sent me a letter, just one line, written in his neat hand. The poison was real, but so is your strength. I sip my coffee and listen to the birds tracing their songs across the yard. I glance at the garden, overrun as it is, and think maybe tomorrow I'll pull the weeds. Or maybe not tomorrow, maybe the day after. There's no rush now. The danger has been named, the truth spoken. But peace. It didn't arrive with the verdict. Justice gave me safety. That's different. Safety is a wall, a lock on the door, a paper signed by a judge. Peace is something else. It's smaller. It's the breath you take on the porch when no one is watching. It's the way the steam curls from your mug on a morning that belongs only to you. It's the decision to plant new flowers in a garden where once you only feared footsteps. I look out at the quiet street, raise my mug slightly as if in a toast, and say aloud, "Justice gave me safety, but peace. Peace is something you build, one quiet morning at a time." What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.